After a day of such dismal local elections, I thought I'd have another look to see if there is anyone thinking about a replacement system, or at least something that we might use if the system breaks down, or a better system. Normally nobody is doing that. Everyone is saying, why can't the people in power do something better? Why can't they be better people? Nobody's talking about a different system, which will be necessary if the current system breaks down. But until now, that is, because I found one person who has been talking about it. He's a gentleman called Richard Vobes. He's on YouTube. He's at least 100 times more popular than me, which isn't that hard. And he's been reading his copy of the What If magazine. It's a very informative magazine. I'd encourage everyone to Google for it and look for it. It contains a lot of exciting information, and it contains information about the goings-on in the borough of Biggleswick, where there's been something of an insurrection. People have decided they're sick of the council, and they decided they wanted to replace the council with a new council of their own. And they would stop paying council tax. They would simply contract with their own brand new council, which they've put into place. And how much better this seemed to work. It was sparked off by the people's outrage at having to put up with 15-minute cities, traffic calming measures and security CCTV. But I will let Richard Vobes describe the system for himself here.
And the chairman said, but the thing is, there is something that we can do. After all, we're paying our taxes. It's our money that's funding all this. Actually, let's not pay our taxes to the council, who are saying there's nothing they can do and they're going to implement it anyway. Why don't we instead pay our taxes into a fund that we, a new council, would take over, and we will make sure that we look after what the things are that we want in this town rather than what the council want in this town. And everybody thought that was a brilliant idea. They were all saying, yes, absolutely. And not only that, he said, isn't it funny how the council tax is all negotiated behind the scenes and you don't know what you're paying for, and if you don't pay it, they're coming down on you like a ton of bricks. Let's get rid of that whole thing. Let's negotiate with each and every individual household the services that you want. How about that? So you may only want the bins and the lights. You may not want to pay for certain other things, and we could negotiate with that. And people were going, blimey, yeah, that sounds good, because if I haven't got a lot of money, I could probably take the rubbish down to the tip myself, or I don't need certain services, or this, that and the other. We want to pay a bit more for the roads and make sure the roads are actually working. We want to pay to get rid of those awful plant pots, and we want to pay to have those cameras removed. And so most people were sort of in agreement that actually, in and amongst themselves, those people, through a new committee, could actually run the town so much better than the councillors. So then the chairman said, fine, that's absolutely fantastic. He said, what I would like to do then is to get everybody to sign on a big, and he had a great big roll of wallpaper, that they're going to sign in a new committee which would be voted on. So this committee is going to be dissolved, a new committee would be set up. You could all vote for who you want to be on that committee with the ethos that we've all decided here in this park, that we don't want the 15-minute cities, we don't want the low traffic neighbourhood rubbish. We want to have that freedom to be able to walk about and not have cameras film us every minute, not have the digital IDs, not have to have biometrics, and the whole caboose. And that the councils, who seem impotent and unable to do anything, we're just going to say, you're irrelevant, you're no longer required, and we're not paying your wages.
So it seems to work very well, according to Richard Vobes, and so well, in fact, that I thought I'd look at supplementary and later copies of the What If magazine to see what happened in Biggleswick. And you'll be surprised what I discovered. A lot more happened. In fact, the chairman, who was a follically challenged man with a friendly face and an amenable manner, he said, isn't this wonderful? Let's get rid of those CCTV cameras and the 15-minute cities traffic calming measure, and let's be ruled by natural law and the principles of the self-evident truths of doing no harm, non-interference, responsibility for yourself, and let's have the council run not by a committee but by a community assembly with all decisions made fully by unanimous agreement, and crucially everyone can opt in and out of services as they please. You don't want to spend much on rubbish collection, you don't have to. You want to spend a bit more on roads, you can do that. And there was a very irritating man in a flowery tie, and he piped up at the back of the meeting, So why have a council at all if everyone's going to agree? And anyway, how will councillors be chosen? And people got pretty irritated with him. They said, oh, you're so irritating. You always spoil everything. It's going to be done by votes. And he says, oh, like now then. And they said, oh, shut up. You spoil everything. So, but the chairman, that's the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, he then said, no, let's go on right here, right now, and let's make some decisions right at the meeting in Biggleswick. And they took a vote right there and then on the range of services that people were going to opt in and out of. Because remember, it wasn't compulsory. You didn't have to pay that council tax compulsorily. You could just pay it for services that you thought you might need. And of course, in addition to that, all decisions would be made by majority, etc. But there would be no pressure. So they went through a list of items that local authorities normally dealt with. And the first one was bin collection. And it had been said, you don't have to pay a lot for this if you don't want to. And the first one who piped up was a man called Travelling Trevor. Now, he lived right at the far end of the village, and he didn't want to spend anything on garbage collection. He was quite happy to take his rubbish down to the municipal dump himself. In fact, it was a matter of principle for him. He would never pay a corrupt council to deal with his rubbish when he knew he could deal with it so much more effectively himself. And so he would visit the municipal tip. And everyone else, they shuffled their feet a bit and they agreed, yes, why should we pay when we can just put the rubbish in the back of our car and take it down to the tip? So that was agreed. No one wanted to pay money for rubbish collection. It seemed that this was working really well. Everyone was opting out and everyone was standing on their own 2 feet, doing it for themselves. So the next thing people had to decide, the next local authority power that people had to decide, that was planning. And everyone hated planning. Lord Up Your Bum, living in his big manor house, he decided that he didn't want to pay for planners because they stopped him putting up his mock Tudor sauna in his front garden. And someone else said that they hadn't been able to stick up 6 houses in their back garden. So everyone hated the council. Why should you pay money just for a bunch of bureaucrats to pass files to each other? No one paid anything for the planning department. There'd be no further planning control. What about parish councils, the level below Biggleswick Borough Council? Well, why should we vote for parish councils at all? Well, there were 2 powers which the chairman, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, he pointed out the Public Health Act of 1875, by which parish councils had the power to regulate the use of open spaces like village greens, or the Open Spaces Act of 1906, by which parish councils had the power to regulate the use of burial grounds. But people said, no, we can deal with that ourselves. I can get the lawnmower out, I can go and mow them myself. We don't need to spend money on parish councils. It's just for a bunch of old gossips to have a chinwag. Why should we pay for that? And the next one that came up was the contribution toward the police. And at this point, Lord Up Your Bum and his pals, they were really quite keen on the police. The police kept order, the police preserved people's properties, and Lord Up Your Bum had quite a bit of that, so he was quite keen on the police. Yes, he wanted to pay for the police. But then, Travelling Trevor, he piped up. As a matter of principle, the police had always been unjust and unfair to him. He was not going to pay a penny towards the police. They were always preventing him from earning his living as an honest tradesman, and they stopped him setting up his business as a garbage disposal expert. And he on principle wasn't going to pay a penny towards the police. And everyone in the crowd, they shuffled their feet a bit, and then they started to agree with Travelling Trevor, not with Lord Up Your Bum. Defund the police, they said. Yes, on principle. We don't want to pay any money. After all, we are all responsible people governed by the principles of natural law within our community assembly under the new council of Biggleswick. And having seen that nobody else was going to pay, Lord Up Your Bum, he decided, he changed his mind. No, he was quite in favour of defunding the police. He didn't want to pay any money either. And so it went on with a full range of services. They went through the whole list: schools, roads, care for older people, people with disabilities, child protection, youth services, libraries, social housing, council housing, housing benefit, leisure centres, the lot. It was remarkable how self-reliant the people of Biggleswick, the borough of Biggleswick, became. They weren't going to pay any money. They could do all these things themselves. It really was a tonic to see people standing on their own 2 feet so well. And the chairman, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, he was really impressed by this unanimous compliance with the principles of natural law. Until someone broke the silence, and that person was, well, it was two people. It was Valerie's single mum and her friend Brenda Breeder. And they said, why should we pay? We've never paid before. It's always been paid for us. We haven't been able to go out and work. We've lived on welfare, so it's always been paid for us. We don't want to have to start paying now. And anyway, if everyone else is paying, we don't need to pay. And if nobody's paying, I'm not going to pay. Everyone thought about that, and everyone agreed. So they took a vote there and then, and the principles of natural law were applied, and the law of nature would sort things out. And the man in the flowery tie, the irritating man in the flowery tie, he himself was surprised, and he remarked on how well natural law, the law of nature, had taken hold of the borough of Biggleswick. And he put forward a motion saying it shouldn't be called the new council, it should be called the state of nature. And everyone saw the joke and they said, "You're so irritating. We're on a high and you spoil it. You always spoil everything." Well, the next issue of the What If magazine, there are a couple of issues after that, and the next one was remarkable because it showed the results that came in the borough of Biggleswick, and they really were astonishing. Firstly, bin collection. No one paid toward bin collection. Everyone would religiously drive their rubbish down to the rubbish tip once a week. And Travelling Trevor, he led the charge on that. He turned out to be a blessing to the community by setting himself up as a garbage contractor again. And he went house to house knocking on doors, and it was amazing how cheaply he would do it, 1/10 of the price that the council were charging. And people were surprised at his public spirit, that he was performing such a public service. They'd never thought of him as being such a nice guy in the past, but here he was. The proof was right before them, and he took their rubbish away every week, and he took their money as well, until they noticed that the rubbish wasn't going to the municipal tip. It was getting thrown in the river by the Biggleswick village green, until the river became a mountain of rubbish. And then next, planning. They got rid of the planning department, those irritating people who stop you doing what you want and just paper push to one another. Well, it transpired that it wasn't only the people of Biggleswick who'd been reading the What If magazine, also businessmen around the country had been reading it, and there was one, the Combined Abattoir, Fat Smelting and Glue Factory Company Limited. They had been reading the What If magazine and watching the goings on in Biggleswick. They'd been looking at a place where they could set up a combined abattoir, fat smelting works and glue factory, and no planning authority across the country would allow them to do so. But there was no planning authority in Biggleswick, so they made an offer that he couldn't refuse to a farmer who owned the field by the Biggleswick village green, just the other side of the river, that had now become a garbage dump. And they took possession of that field, and within a week they'd set up their abattoir, fat smelting works and glue factory. And pretty soon the whole village was enveloped by a foul stench and an overhead cloud of lard. And it didn't stop there. In the next borough over, there were a bunch of Muslim people, and they'd been trying so hard to set up a mosque in the sister borough to Biggleswick, Ginger Valley Council, and they couldn't do it. Somebody was stopping them, don't know who, but they couldn't do it there. But they saw there was no planning control in Biggleswick, so they bought a big house right on the edge of the green, knocked it down and turned it into a towering mosque. And what about the bylaws? Well, the bylaws which allowed the parish council to regulate use of open spaces like the village green or burial places like the churchyard. Suddenly what they found, the parish council was getting no money, so they couldn't control this. And what they noticed was that Travelling Trevor, he had gone to all his mates in the other neighbouring borough, Archie Borough, and they had they had found, we'd gone to his mates and said, come and set up your caravans on the village green and in the churchyard. And within a week, the whole village green was covered in clapped out caravans, wrecked cars and burning sofas. And then what about the police? Well, contributions weren't going to the police. And the police said, if you don't pay, we can't really come out unless it's something really serious like a murder. If it's just a house burglary or a little bit of arson, I'm afraid we just don't have the budget to come into Biggleswick. Sorry about that. And that meant that crime flourished. Almost overnight. It was shocking. People were shocked how crime flourished. It wasn't just a bit of fly tipping. Characters you would never have expected got into crime in a big way. The vicar turned out to be a passionate cat burglar, and he went round Biggleswick village nearly every night with a bunch of choir boys breaking into houses, and he soon graduated up to home invasions. And eventually he invaded Lord Up-Your-Bum's mansion, and he grabbed Lord Up-Your-Bum, bashed him over the head, and then took his wife to one side, and then held a gun to Lord Up-Your-Bum's children and shouted to Lord Up-Your-Bum, "Where's your money hidden?" And Lord Up-Your-Bum's wife screamed at him, "Just tell them where the money is." So he did, and he handed over the money to this vicar and his choir boy, a gang of burglars. And then on the way out, just for good measure, they set fire to the place. And people called the fire service, and the fire service said, "Sorry, you haven't contributed. We don't have the budget to come out to your village unless it's something really big, and a house fire isn't big enough." So Lord Up-Your-Bum's big manor house burnt to the ground. And the only people who showed the best character turned out to be Valerie's single mum and Brenda Breeder. Now their council block, just outside the village of Biggleswick, very quickly the stairwell filled up with rubbish. The lift stopped working. They managed to plough their way through the rubbish with a folded up pushchair, and they managed to do something to feed all their children. Brenda Breeder was able to prostitute herself out to some rich people in the borough, and when they said keep it confidential, she kept their confidence. And Valerie's single mum, she was a bit older, she couldn't face doing that, so she went to beg from at various farms. Some of them gave her money, but most of them thought they'd make her work for it, do a bit of cleaning for her own good, you understand. She put up with that, she didn't complain. She couldn't do much cleaning with 3 or 4 children in tow, but she went along with it because she got food to feed her children, and they managed to survive. They were the people who showed the best character in the village, which was impressive because they were the people hardest hit, as the most vulnerable people always are. But in general, people didn't like the system. They didn't like the river filled with rubbish. They didn't like the combined abattoir, fat smelting works and glue factory. They didn't like the brand new mosque. They didn't like all the travellers on the green and in the churchyard. They didn't like the fact that crime was rampant. So they decided, let's have a second meeting. And at that meeting, the chairman, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, he decided things have gone wrong here. And he said to them, "You know when I said you don't have to pay for certain things? Well, I lied. It is compulsory to pay that council tax to the new council now, although don't worry, we're not going to call it council tax. We're going to call it a community contribution, or else a personal input." And he showed them this chart. Now, I got this chart from the What If magazine. It was also in the Biggleswick Parish newsletter, and it showed income tax contribution of the top 50% of taxpayers, figures from HMRC. And what it showed is the top 50% of taxpayers paid 91% of tax, or else the top 10%, they paid 61% of tax. So effectively, what that meant, and what the chairman, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, what he told them is you shouldn't worry about paying council tax, because in fact most people, 9 to 1, 90% of people get more out than they put in. And so that was where he justified making it compulsory. And Lord Up-Your-Bum was very happy about that, because now the police would be funded. But the question was, who is now going to run this new council? Because now they have a big budget. Who will run it? Well, the chairman piped up, "We've always said that things would be decided by majority vote, and I'm going to stand for election." And the funny thing was, the very same people who'd stood for election under the old council, they stood for election again for the same party, Labour and Conservative. Labour had as their slogan, "Better Borough, Better Future," and Conservatives had as their slogan, "New Council, New Dawn." The only difference was, the only promise that they did make, and both of them made this promise, was that there would be no 15-minute cities traffic calming measures in Biggleswick village and no CCTV systems. So apart from their slogans, there was no difference between the two candidates. They took a vote and Labour won by 51% to 49%. And the chairman, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, he didn't get any votes. And he was upset about this, and he went and asked people, why didn't you vote for me to run the budget? You know I'm better than these old hacks. And people said, listen, we're talking about our welfare here. We're talking about free stuff from the state. That's important. You haven't got a track record there. We're going to be cautious about this. We're going to be business-like, and we want people who have experience of running it. That's why we always vote for Labour and Conservative and then keep complaining about them. But the good thing is it kind of worked. It was effective. They gradually got rid of the smelting works and abattoir and glue factory. They cleared the pile of rubbish, the mountain of rubbish, out of the river that was flowing past the village green. They arrested the vicar and got him put in jail. The police came and got him. They cleared the village green and the churchyard of the travellers, and they enforced. The planners came in and enforced against the unlawful mosque. But it was still called the new name of the new Biggleswick Council, and that's what mattered. That's what the chairman said. This is what is important. It's called the new Biggleswick Council. And the irritating man in the flowery tie said, he put forward a motion saying, why don't we call it same old Biggleswick Council? And everyone, because they were so relieved to have dealt with the old problems, they said to him, oh, you're so irritating, you always spoil everything. Besides, said local people, we're not like the old council. We're going to have weekly chats in the parish council rooms about the principles of natural law. We would never have done that under the old council. But there were just two hitches that came to bite people. The first was the collection of council tax, and that was a problem because it wasn't done locally. That was done under the auspices of central government, and central government that came to the council and said, well, if you want us to enforce this council tax, which you are now reliant upon, if you want us to make sure that people pay it, we think you should comply with our 15-minute cities, traffic calming measures and CCTV. You need to form part of the system if we're going to collect the money on your behalf. And so reluctantly everyone grumbled and moaned and complained, but went along with it. And things went back pretty much to the way they had been before. And that was a pity because 2 weeks later in the next issue of the What If magazine, it was discovered that the government had gone broke and every council in the country had gone broke. The stock market had collapsed and the country was broke, and government and local authorities simply ceased to exist. And the councillors skedaddled. They went away to their bunkers in New Zealand or wherever it was. They got on the last plane out to avoid the wrath of the people. And so it was left to the chairman again, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, to call a third meeting. But this time, Biggleswick, the borough of Biggleswick, had an advantage. And their advantage was that they knew the reality of the principles of natural law. They knew the chaos that it meant. They knew that they had to get up a system. They had to impose some kind of law, particularly criminal law. They didn't want to go back to the smelting factory next to the village green. They didn't want the mosque to come back. They didn't want the pile of rubbish in the river. They didn't want the village green and the churchyard dominated by travellers. And they realised they had to do something. So at that point, the chairman, the follically challenged man with the friendly face and the amenable manner, he said, does anybody know of a system of law that we can all sign up to? That's what we need. We haven't got any money, we can't ask people for council tax, but we can at least sign up, we can at least have a system of law. And at that point, the irritating man in the flowery tie, he said, yes, I've come up with a system of law. I've written one. You can use it for free. And all I ask is that you say, I told you so. And people muttered under their breath how irritating he was, how he spoiled everything. But they saw the sense of it and they went along with it. And what they said was that everyone who lived there had to sign. If you wanted to live there, in peace and freedom, you were best off signing this code of law. If you didn't sign it, you were outside the protection of law, because that legal system said we will treat each other in a lawful way. We will observe, and we can be punished if we treat each other in anything other than or in a way that is forbidden under this code of law. Anyone who didn't sign up to it was obviously outside that umbrella of protection. They effectively became outcasts, outlaws, banished from society. Nobody wanted that. That was dangerous, because anyone could do anything they liked to you. You had no protection of the law. The people who did sign, they were organised, there were lots of them, and they were stronger than you. So it was better to sign up and have the protection of law, which incidentally enabled you to get a job, to be able to trade and make a living. And so people signed up. But then the question arose, is there anyone that we actually do want to exclude? And people said, well, we don't want that mosque coming back. I think we want those people who tried to start that mosque. I don't want them signing up. They can't join. We don't want them in here. And what about Travelling Trevor and all his mates? Well, we don't really want them in here either. They've got strings of criminal convictions. All they do is try and take over the village green and put on car wrecks and burnt out sofas on there. I don't think we want them to join. So we'll exclude them. And then what about the burgling vicar? And it was decided that they decided no. People with strings of criminal convictions, they couldn't join. They were unsafe. All it meant is if you allowed criminals to join, it meant you had to spend more money on police to police them, on courts to try them, and on prisons to imprison them. No one wanted to pay all that money simply to be the victim of more crime. So people with strings of criminal conviction, they were also barred. They were not allowed to sign. And what about the bins? Well, one provision was that if you signed this, one of the provisions was that you had to sign up to a weekly garbage collection rota, so that people couldn't simply forget, or so that people wouldn't have the incentive to chuck all their rubbish into the river. And besides, it was cheaper than getting typhus. And so things progressed in Biggleswick. There wasn't the welfare state. People weren't getting free stuff, but people were under the protection of the law. Travelling Trev, he was told that a deputation went to his caravan one day and said, "You've committed too many crimes, you and your mates. We think you need to go, or you need to sell up or get bounced out. You don't have any legal rights, and you're probably going to have to end up in the Badlands with all your mates on your own reservation outside." But the nice thing about it was that crime became non-existent within this system, and people feared expulsion. People feared getting pushed out into the Badlands, and crime was pretty much stamped out. There was very little. Also, people feared the form of restorative justice, which became very expensive if you got caught. People didn't want to get caught out that way. It was a much tougher system of justice. And so Biggleswick became very quickly a peaceful area, a crime-free area, an area where people could live safely near each other and people could trade. And the surprising thing was the curious developments which developed in the months and years afterwards. Firstly, there was no government currency, there was no council currency, there was no paper money. People went back to using gold and silver coins. And the effect of this was to collapse the debt bubble. The debt bubble went, and what that meant was people stopped investing lots of money in speculative ventures far out into the future, and the accent became on things that had value now, things that had definite value that people could rely on, things that were not a gamble that banks could bet on and then get bailed out of if it went wrong. And as a result of that, the value of labour went up. Productive labour became much more valuable than speculative investment into the future, and ordinary workers found themselves much wealthier. And the follow-on from that is that one or two wives of the higher earners went to their husbands and said, "You know, I've never really wanted to go out to work. I've loved the idea of staying home with the children. And now the state has fallen over. We're no longer getting beaten over the head with feminist rhetoric. We've no longer got equalities officers coming in interfering and saying that I should be paid as a part-time worker just as much as a full-time worker. It's not so nice at work. And you're doing well. Your wages keep going up. Darling, why don't you let me stay at home with the children? That's what I'd like to do. As a result of that, the labour pool shrunk, wages went up, husbands started earning more, and gradually more and more wives started going to their husbands and saying, actually, I think I would like to stay at home with the children. It's what most women want. And so you gradually, within Biggleswick, there was a return to what you might call more traditional or more sane gender roles. Another development was that Biggleswick became a thriving hub of commerce, if it wanted to be, because every multinational in the world wanted to locate their head office there. Because one, there was no tax, and two, there was rule of law. It was safe, and that meant it was paradise for every business around the whole world. And the people of Biggleswick became fantastically rich in a short space of time, relatively speaking. People did experiment. They experimented with PC multiculturalism, but they found, as with the burgling vicar, this was a problem because a lot of these multicultural populations, they had a much greater tendency to commit crimes, and people felt, well, why should I pay more to police crime in order to be a victim of crime? Why should I put more money in to have these people in when they're more likely to commit a crime against me? I don't want to pay money to be a victim of crime. And so, no, people went back to a much more homogenous monocultural society. That people had had enough of PC multiculturalism. There were no MPs, there was no state authority ramming it down your throat and enforcing it with eye-watering ferocity every 5 minutes and pushing propaganda about it at you. And people actually quite liked that Biggleswick became a nice quiet corner of England. There was very little crime, and people had a lot in common, culturally in common, and people felt they could trust people who acted, spoke and looked like them. And it felt like people had gone back to a version of England that they had missed. Ironically, people found that there were a lot of good ways to save money. One of the ways was to use CCTV instead of policemen, and they developed a cracking CCTV system. Not only that, people found that Biggleswick Village, now being a nice little quiet corner of England, wouldn't it be nice if they developed some really quite stringent traffic calming measures, and some traffic calming measures were implemented which weren't a million miles away from the 15-minute cities traffic calming measures. And the irritating man in the flowery tie, that caused him to remark, wasn't it strange? And he did this many years later, after Biggleswick had been established as a very nice, quiet part of England. He remarked many years later at the coronation of King William, wasn't it strange that all of that business that had happened years ago had been sparked off by a ruckus about CCTV and traffic calming measures? And wasn't it funny that those things were now in place today? Isn't it strange? And everyone said he was very irritating, and they were having such a good time at King William's coronation. They resented him, always spoiling everything. So that is the story, the recent history of the borough of Biggleswick, how it went from the old system to a new system and the state of nature, and then back to the old system. And it was only when the old system broke down, fell over, that people were forced onto their mettle and to do things effectively for themselves. And they did, and it worked better. But I will leave a link to the history, at the beginning of that history, as described by Richard Vobes, down in the description section, so you can look at his full video yourself. But it really is fascinating, and do look out for that What If magazine. It really is well worth a subscription. Thank you.